Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and our chats with Emily, as we're calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson contained in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 164, Mama Never Forgets Her Birds. Now the background here is significant, but I'm going to make the argument that this is actually a far more subversive poem than has often, I think, been understood or recognized. I'll try and make that argument. Now, this is, as we said, poem 164 of the 1,775 poems contained in the Johnson edition. This poem was sent to the Norcross cousins on their mother's passing. Now, this was on 17th of April, 1860. And we'll have more to say about Lavinia Norcross here in a few minutes. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already studied our intro set of comments, and I'm hopeful that you have already read the previous 163 poems we just finished with, Though My Destiny Be Faustian. Now, we have commented, and if you've been reading with us up through poem 163, you know that Emily has had a number of tribute poems specifically to those who died and how they died. So it's going to be an interesting kind of bit of biography here. Now, Lavinia Norcross, her mother's favorite sister, will die of consumption, again, 17 April 1860, at the age of 48, quite young. Emily's cousins, the daughters of Lavinia, Lavinia and Frances, Louisa and Frances, are obviously going to be distraught. And so Emily, as theologian, as comforter, will channel in some ways the Matthew 10:29 through 31 passage. In the King James Version it reads, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear ye not therefore, ye are of more value than many sparrows." Now, of course, the focus of that verse is the term Father. Now, it is interesting how this one works. Vinnie, Emily's sister, just happened to be staying with the family when the death occurred, right? We do have a letter which Emily sent to Vinnie about their aunt's passing, and it begins as follows, quote, this is again Emily Dickinson, "I can't believe it when your letters come saying what Aunt Lavinia said just before she died. Blessed Aunt Lavinia now. All the world goes out, and I see nothing but her room and angels bearing her into those great countries in the blue sky of which we don't know anything." At the end of the letter it reads, quote, "Well, she is safer now than we know or even think. Tired little aunt, sleeping ever so peaceful, tuneful little aunt, singing as we trust hymns than which the robins have no sweeter ones. Good night, broken hearts, Lou and Fanny and Uncle Loring, Vinnie, remember sister." Again, this is letter 217. I want to emphasize, even in that letter, her use of the word little. And as we pointed out, in 172 poems, Emily uses the word little. Let's see how she uses it even here. "Mama never forgets her birds, though in another tree. She looks down just as often and just as tenderly as when her little mortal nest with cunning care she wove. If either of her sparrows fall, she notices above." Now, I find this a fascinating poem because notice it's Mama and not Father. And the fact that she's channeling in some ways or referencing or alluding in some ways to the Matthew 10:29 to 31 passage makes this an interesting poem that could be read as a type of theological blasphemy. Notice it begins with the observation, because of the background of this poem being sent again to her cousins, Mama never forgets her birds. And of course, this idea that Emily will play with again and again about forgetting that the only real sin is to forget, the need to reclaim, the need to hold on and to remember. Mama never forgets her birds. Now, obviously, we could be referencing the 2 cousins as the birds. Though in another tree, in other words, Mama is elsewhere. And it's always interesting to read Emily's letters and poems as it relates to her view of the afterlife, as we said, the flood question. What happens in the afterlife? Is there a heaven? Is that where she is? Notice in her letter to Vinny, she seems to suggest so. Though in another tree, she looks down just as often. Let's point out, by the way, that here the mother is portrayed as a bird, right? She looks down just as often and just as tenderly. You'll come to this use of her word tenderly. It's an important word for her. In 441, this is my letter to the world, the very last line, judge tenderly of me. Here, just as tenderly as when her little mortal nest, so in other words, two nests here, the nest of this earth, the nest of heaven, right? Notice again the use of the word little. With cunning care, notice the C's here, with cunning care she wove, if either of her sparrows fall, now we're obviously referencing directly with quotation marks the Matthew 10:29-31 passage, she notices above. Now, this idea of weaving and her use of the word wove always seems to want to take us back to the Odyssey, to the weaving. We gave full lectures on the Odyssey a while ago at learnstrong.net, and you'll remember that one of the central motifs, and I think Emily learned this from her study of the Odyssey, was the idea of weaving. Remember, that's exactly what Penelope does to stay off those suitors for so long, weaving that shroud and then unweaving at night. What exactly are we going to say at 2A about a poem like this? I think that one of the arguments that she's making is that the love of a mother is profound. We've commented already about Emily's dance with her own mother. At 2B, I love the subtle blasphemy, potentially, of this poem. Notice it's not the father, it's the mother, as it relates at 3A to the Matthew 10:29-31 passage. Finally, at 3B, how do you feel about your own mother to own a poem like this? How do you feel about your own mother, and how do you read this poem? Do you read this poem as in some ways an attack on the patriarchy, as some postmodern readers have read recently this poem? Do you see this as a subtle attack? And to what degree does that make you smile? Thank you.